All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Pulkit Agrawal. I'll give people a few, just about 30 seconds to tune in, and then we'll get going from there. Awesome. All right, cool. So for today's talk, we're going to focus on understanding your brewery's health, diagnosing quality and efficiency issues using data. And so the really awesome thing about this is that we're going to dive in on some best practices and go from there and just see what we can do to show how data can really help a brewery grow. So with that, quick introduction. My name is Pulkit K. I'm the founder and CEO of The Fifth Ingredient. My background is that I studied mechanical engineering at Harvard University and then was recruited to work at Ballast Point as an engineer. As an engineer, I focus a lot on the entire packaging side of things, helping out with kegging, bottling, canning, and also helping them launch their nitrogen beer in bottles and bulk kegs. And so it was really cool to do that. And after a couple of years, I left and started the Fifth Ingredient because the goal was to really help breweries use their data to brew better beer and brew more beer. And that's where the Beer 30 software came about, which was a way for breweries to track their data from start to finish. And we'll touch upon that a little later, but really the focus is on how to use data to brew better beer. With that, what is the fifth ingredient, right? So we all know the four main ingredients in beer: water, malt, hops, and yeast. And the fifth ingredient that ties in with everything is data. And everything that we're talking about is always around data here at the fifth ingredient and how data can be used to really drive the brewery moving forwards and making better decisions. So with that, let's go into our little session overview. So first thing we're going to talk about is understanding breweries' health based on quality and efficiency. From there, we'll dive in on the first question is, where do I start? Right? The purpose of this talk is to really help people understand how they can actually implement best practices at a brewery. And the first question that people have is, where do I start? And with that, we'll talk about three areas of data management and really dive in on what some of those issues look like. From there, the second question comes up: how do I organize the data? Right? And we'll start talking about and looking into what the three steps of brewery analytics end up being. Question three ends up being, what actions can I take today? Right? This is something with data that, yes, it's a very long thinking process and very much a long-term vision for what's happening, but there are some actions that you can take today. And with that, we'll talk about the 4 Ps to brew better beer and brew more beer. The fourth question ends up being, what does success look like? Right after you add and do Q1, 2, 3, what is success? And we'll talk about the three areas of data management again, but this time with solutions. And finally, we'll dive in on key takeaways as well. So at any point, if anybody has questions, feel free to add it into the comments. StreamYard will be able to show it to me, and I'm happy to address that, and we'll chat about some more questions towards the end as well. So with that, let's dive in. So the first thing, breweries' health focusing on quality and efficiency. So the key takeaway that I really want to emphasize is that complacency kills a brewery, right? And really the complacency happens in two key areas. The first one is what ties in with quality. And in this case, the goal is to really keep customers happy. And the second one is efficiency and focusing on growing profit margins, right? One of the big things that I've always thought is that at this point, with the industry trending the way it is, there are basically winners and losers that are coming about based on if they can keep customers happy and if they can grow profit margins, right? At this point, if I go to your brewery and you're not making high quality beer, I have literally in that entire neighborhood many other breweries that I can go to, and that ends up tying on the quality side. And similarly, from an efficiency standpoint, if you can't keep your cost margins at a reasonable level and understanding what's going on, you're really not going to be able to stay in business. And so, with that, the whole objective here is that in order to understand your brewery's health, all the different data metrics that are happening need to really dive in from a quality and an efficiency standpoint. So, with that, let's start off with the first question: where do I start? Right? So, we all are trained to capture data and notes on paper, spreadsheets, and whiteboards. But really, what happens is that it can be very overwhelming to understand how to use all that data. And with that, what comes into effect is understanding what you can start doing to track that data, right? So what can you do to actually start tracking? And with that, we create 3 areas of data management, which are basically the issues. With that, what we've come up with right now as an example for you, what I want to emphasize is 3 areas that dive in with process inefficiencies, diving with high process cost, and going further with poor quality and inconsistency. And really, the exercise here that I want to emphasize for your brewery is to take some time and think about what are the big 3 areas that dive in with data management that help you understand what's going on with your actual brewery, help you understand why your brewery is going really well or where it's actually failing a little bit. And it's those 3 areas that you then start using these exercises to help out with. And these 3 of process inefficiencies, high process cost, and poor quality and inconsistency are just some examples that dive in with brewery health. So with that, let's make this actually very tangible and very concrete. So some examples that come to mind. The first one, production planning issues with tanks sitting empty or full for extra days, right? Having a schedule where you're not always optimizing what's going on when it comes to tank turnaround is actually very inefficient. From there, having redundancies in paper logs, whiteboards, end of shift emails, and spreadsheets, those are all ways that you're really focusing in on inefficient process management. Number 3, extra hours that are spent on brewing, filtering, packaging, right? Really understanding how many hours a brew should take and diving in on how many minutes and hours the brew is actually taking, similar to filter runs, similar to packaging, depending on the size and scale of your brewery. From there, let's shift into topic number 2, which is high process cost. So some of the key areas that people start understanding from a cost analysis is just having delayed reactions to issues as they arise, whether that's diving in on brewing, fermenting, filter, bright tank package, and yeast, but not being very proactive and really having the offsets that come with having delayed reactions. From there, diving in on extra costs for grains, hops, cans, bottles, supplies, and really coming back into effect to understanding what's happening at your brewery where you're paying extra for particular ingredients, right? So just diving in on those aspects and understanding from a cost perspective what's going on. And finally, not knowing the exact cost of goods or COGS per product, right? And there's numerous talks that throughout this conference people were giving on cost of goods and accounting practices, and really not knowing the exact cost per pint, per bottle or can or keg is really not efficient use of data management and has issues in the brewery's health. From there, there's also everything on quality and inconsistency. So imagine having to destroy a tank that is out of specification, right? And the impact that comes along with that as well. From there, diving in on customers being very unhappy and going to a different brewery. Like I said, at this point, we all know that in one square radius of a mile, there's usually many breweries that are around, especially in densely populated areas. And having a customer that's unhappy is really going to be a tie-in with having your brand reputation being tarnished, right? And so again, these are just 3 high-level examples that dive in with understanding a brewery's health. And we're going to now go into how to actually use data to start targeting each of these key areas. So question number 2 that comes about is, how do I organize all this data, right? And this ties in nicely with 3 key steps of brewery analytics that we live by here at the Fifth Ingredient. So with organizing data, the key is that it should be the feedback from the data that's actually driving these business decisions. Many times people end up going from an anecdote perspective rather than using data-driven decision-making abilities. With that, it's actually the data management itself that impacts daily operations. So what that looks like is that poor data management can be extremely time consuming and difficult, and good data management can actually be super fast and clear. They really help tie in together to show the importance of power as well as flexibility. And so when we start diving in on this, what you want to start looking at is, well, how do you organize all that data, right? We're looking at literally hundreds of potential data points, but I want to actually show you what the actual solution could be and the big 3 categories to think about when it comes to data organization. So with that, it's basically the 3 key steps of brewery analytics. So with that, the first one is diving in on collection of data. Second one is transforming that data. And the third one is actually using it to do proper prediction. So again, 3 steps: collection, transformation, and prediction that ties in with everything related to brewery analytics and data management. So let's actually talk a little bit about some examples with that as well. So number one, with collection. What you're looking at is that you want to track as much data as possible on the entire process side. This includes every single data point that you can think about for brewing, fermenting, filter, bright tank package, yeast, and even diving in with things like sensory and quality metrics. But the goal is just get as much data as possible throughout. Now, with that, being able to take it a step further and understanding of that data, which ones are estimates versus exact readings, right? This becomes really powerful as you're starting to look at data integrity and understanding just what each of those aspects really dives in with. And finally, a third example of data collection is validating the instruments they use to measure. There's a really great talk that Steve Hendo from Rockstar Brewer actually gave on data integrity as well that you can definitely tune in on. But the key is that the instruments that are being utilized really need to dive into the proper measurements and making sure that they're actually calibrated correctly. Because the last thing you want to do is take all these pH readings but then have the data not being valid because the pH meter wasn't properly calibrated, right? So again, just ways to think about brewery analytics that dive in on the entire collection side. From there, let's talk a little bit about transformation. So when you have all this data, the first step is to organize that data into tables, having proper rows and columns, and really being able to start analyzing from a visual perspective what's going on. But the key with that is to take that data and actually start graphing it into visual representations, right? As humans, we actually consolidate data much better when it's actually shown in graphs and tangible visual representations. Otherwise, everything just really looks like it's sitting there on a bunch of grids and a bunch of spreadsheets that really don't mean much. And so you take that collected data and then you start transforming it into something meaningful. From there, with this transformation, you're able to actually start understanding what's happening when it comes to accuracy and precision for each data point as well. So again, accuracy and precision are very key to understanding if you're hitting the target as you need consistently, or if it's not in the same ballpark and what's going on with that, right? And so again, just really good ways to understand the difference between accuracy and precision. From there, the third step of brewery analytics is to focus on using it to actually do proper prediction. What that means is to actually use past data to make inferences on future events, right? And really being able to understand where the data came from to help you understand where you're now going with that actual data. With that, you really need to dive in on proper success metrics and comparing data points to the standards. No employee, no brewery owner, no brewer likes to be told that they're not doing something properly if they don't have a target associated with it, right? If you're able to provide data-driven elements for, hey, this is what the gold standard looks like on brew day, you're able to then start seeing how that data is trending over time and understanding what exactly dives in with different data points and standards. With that, the final aspect as an example of prediction is really focusing on tolerances and validating each brew. So for example, if I know that my mash pH needs to be 4.5 as an example, what I know is that if it's plus zero point 0.1 and minus zero point 0.2, it may be still on the green threshold side of things. But then as I start deviating from that actual set point, it actually needs to show to me what's happening from a tolerance perspective. And with that, you're actually able to make more predictive elements that dive in with understanding just how that brewer is going to dive in and how all those aspects go to make the best beer possible. From there, let's talk about the third question. What actions can I take today? Right? So all of this can be something that people think about is going to take weeks to months to years to implement, but really there are some actions that can be taken today. Many people use spreadsheets to do this analysis, but a really tangible action could also be to use brewery data management software systems to actually make this happen. And there are many softwares in the market, and you can do your own research to understand what works best. But a concrete example could be using something like Beer 30, which actually dives in from grain to glass analysis, but dives in further with everything from the actual brew process into batch costing and traceability, all the way to sales and distribution, so that way you have proper grain to glass tracking. But the key with whatever data management software you're using is to actually set standards for each areas of operations. And if you decide that, hey, a data management system is not the way you want to go right now, that's fine. Continue to use your spreadsheets and paper logs, but there needs to be proper analysis areas with that. And that's where the 4 Ps to brew better beer and brew more beer come in, where every single spreadsheet, every single area in a data management system needs to dive in with these 4 key components of brewing better beer and brewing more beer, and really understanding how that brewery is trending from a health perspective. So, with that, the first P, proactive validation. The goal is to be as proactive as possible to not be reactive. You want to be able to fix things in fermentation on day 1 or 2 rather than waiting until day 7 or 8 when you're now being reactive to what's going on. The second P ties in with predictive analysis, being able to predict exactly how things are going to trend based on past data as well. The third one is process improvement. So actually making adjustments as the data is coming in and actually continuously improving the process, whether it's from a cost perspective or whether it's from a brewing perspective. And finally, looking at performance indicators. And in this talk right now, I'm going to go into 18 performance indicators, or KPIs as some people call them, key performance indicators, to understand exactly how things are trending for the brewery as a whole. So with that, let's start off and dive right in. So P1A is proactive validation, and this is a concrete example of how you can implement this on the brew side of things, where this is a screenshot of Beer 30 from the brew side of things. I noticed that the system is creating different tolerances for each critical brewing spec. And these tolerances, as you can see with this orange box, are diving in with different targets and understanding for the user instant feedback. Where instead of waiting at the end of brew day, as I type in the readings when it comes to strike water temperature, pH, mash, gravity, things like that, I'm getting real-time user feedback, and it's actually being assigned in an intuitive color system based on deviation from the target values in green, yellow, and red, right? And with that, what you're able to do is you're able to tie those in with real-time alerts to other team members via text and email, right? Again, being proactive when it comes to validation is a great example on brew day to understand how your data is going from a quality and efficiency perspective. From there, let's dive in on P1A again with proactive validation, but on the fermentation side. So this is a really good example of looking at a fermentation log and being able to see things like, hey, this is how gravity is trending over time. Or looking at the comparison with different temperature set points, actual versus the set point itself, and being able to see that, hey, things are deviating in green and yellow or red formats. But then more importantly, it's actually doing more with the tank sheets, right? A lot of people just have that piece of paper or clipboard just dived in along with that tank sheet and on that tank. But the key thing needs to be to actually take this data and even start graphing it out, right? Use graph paper if you don't have a management system that does this for you, and actually start looking at the good data management practice I mentioned earlier about transforming this data into proper visual representations so you can compare each batches on top of one another. Now, again, this can seem very overwhelming for customers, right? And overwhelming for breweries as they start diving in on the brewery health side of things. But let's take it a next step further with the second P for data analysis, which is predictive analysis. And here's a great example of looking at gravities. And what you'll see here from the screenshot is using a software system to actually track how gravities are trending over time and observing based on this gravity and seeing that in this particular example, there's a super tight spread between gravities and day numbers, and you're very consistently hitting that around 1069 specific gravity. And yet, for those same 6 beers that I have here, if I were to actually look at pH instead, what you're able to see is that when you actually use beer pH as a flavor number for beer, in this example, for those same 6 beers that were super tight on the gravity side, we're able to see that on pH, it's actually very inconsistent and it's ranging from 5.1 to 5.9, and you can see that the data is spread all over. And we actually had a customer use this information to realize that the water coming in from the city was fluctuating over time. And so with that, they were able to take concrete actions on brew day and knock out pH to actually dive in and understand just how this was going to trend to have more consistent product. Again, quality and efficiency really dive in hand to hand for understanding breweries' health. From there, let's look at process improvements, right? And costs are a really good way to understand that. For a lot of people, costs really dive in with understanding using the batch costing as efficiency metrics and being able to understand exactly what's happening in for grains, hops and adjuncts, yeast, diving in further with packaging supplies, even taking it a step further with labor and rental costs, right? Imagine you're renting kegs from somebody like Kegs or Convoy and understanding what those actual numbers look like. From there, being able to understand with all this information, to including final landed costs of items and including shipping and taxes, to understand where the big picture for process improvement dives in with actually having proper cost of goods, right? And this is where the cost of goods sold can dive in very nicely to understand that a 24 pack of bottles is 14.77, 24 pack of cans is 10.30, and a half barrel keg is costing me $90.42. Right? When you start getting into this granular level, you realize that this is what is currently for most people in 7 to 15 different spreadsheets and all over. And a data management system like Beer 30 can really help streamline all of that to really understand what's happening from a brewery health perspective. From there, as a part of process improvement, really diving in with proper traceability. And with tracing, understanding proper batch traceability, where if there's ever a product recall because of different lot numbers from a particular vendor, or being able to dive in with different quality metrics, you're able to see how that all dives in from a quality perspective as well. Finally, let's talk about performance indicators. And these are 18 different indicators that we've come up with that really help a brewery understand what's happening from start to finish. And so, again, the objective here is to give you some examples to look at, but then think about how they actually apply your brewery and then execute on that as a management team to understand what are the standards you're holding each brew and more importantly, each employee to when it comes to their day-to-day side of things. So the first one, a great example, is minutes per brew, understanding just how long things are taking to make actual brew process happen. Number two, understanding how many liters or barrels or hectoliters are actually being brewed. Number three, how much is actually being packaged, right? Having the number of brewing all the way to packaging is really able to understand, number four, what is the brew to package yield, right? A lot of people need to understand what the actual losses are from the wort that's being knocked out all the way to the actual packaging size and what's being put into bottles, cans, and keg, and the overall losses that happen in between. From there, understanding yeast health and understanding what's happening from a genealogy perspective, right? With a second element associated with this, what tends to happen is if, let's say, that the yeast tied in with a particular beer is stalling, then you know that any harvested yeast you have is also going to stall. And so diving in, understanding just how often yeast is up to par. From there, understanding true to brand aspects, right? What's going on when it comes to your beer's quality and having proper sensory panels for your entire team. Next up, number seven, gravity consistency. And number eight, pH consistency. So one of the cool things as well from the graphs that I showed earlier, you can actually start integrating with proper hardware vendors as well, such as Precision Fermentation. And PFI Precision Fermentation is one of the sponsors for this entire CBP event. But what's really cool is that you can then start having that data for gravity and pH diving in directly not only with that beer, but also into brewery management systems like Beer 30 as well, where now you can start trending minute by minute what's happening for gravities and pH across all your beers, right? And so that's where the hardware component diving with the software side becomes super interesting from a consistency perspective. Next up, understanding DO and CO2 levels, right? This can be on brew side, fermentation side, or even on packaging side to really understand how all these bits and pieces dive in together. From there, packaging downtime. Number 10, how many minutes is equipment going down for? You may have an equipment like a canning line that's rated for 30 cans a minute, or running up even faster to 100 cans, 400 cans, whatever scale you're at. But the key is how many minutes are you actually down for on packaging day, and what do those efficiency numbers look like on a day-by-day basis? Are you hitting the target that the vendor is saying that your brewery can actually do from the packaging side of things? From there, number 11, looking at packaging fill levels and understanding just how things are trending from a fill level perspective and consistency that ties in with the US government, Australian government, New Zealand government, all these different agencies that are there for regulation of alcohol to understand just how consistently you're filling the product. And number 12, understanding final ABV percentages, IBUs, colors, and really specifying what's happening with the final product and understanding how that dives in with whether or not it's on point. From there, let's talk a little bit more from a business perspective as part of KPIs, right? This is where the efficiency side ties in. Number 13, scheduling changes. How often is it that the brews that are planned out are actually being changed by the actual brew team, right? Or packaging team? Number 14 is tank residence time. How long is it sitting in the actual tank for? And what should be the actual turnaround for empty tanks or the actual fill levels? And understanding if the beer is finished fermenting, what's the bottleneck for it to not actually be packaged out immediately? Number 15, understanding the on-hand inventory and the dollar values, right? This ties in directly with how much at any given point do you have of raw materials, packaging supplies, and the exact dollar value that's there, so that way you understand just what's there for the entire values. But similarly for finished goods as well. What is the actual dollar value of items that are sitting in the cold box, items that are sitting in different warehouses? From their understanding from like a balance sheet perspective, how things even look like from an assets and liabilities side, and understanding how on-hand inventory and finance and finished goods dive in from end of month or on a day-to-day basis. Number 17, using all that data to then understand the cost per liter, barrel, or liter, barrel, gallon, and understanding what that is, to then actually know understandingly overall what are the sales between projected sales and actual sales, right? And so this is how you're able to really dive in on the brewery health, where not only do you have actual sales and the revenue that you're coming up with, but you also have the cost that correlates with that to have proper profitability. Now, with all this that's being said, let's dive in on the final question. What does success look like? Right? At this point, you've started off, you've actually gone ahead and you started your data management program at your brewery. You're starting to organize the data. You may have taken action such as getting a data management software, really revamping your spreadsheets. But what does actual success look like? So what I want to do is now take those examples and processes we've gone over and dive in on what comes next, which is really to revisit the three areas of data management that we spoke about earlier. But this time, let's actually look at it with solutions. And before you actually execute on any of this, there needs to be proper planning done to understand the three areas and actually setting up success metrics. So in this case, instead, we're now looking at improved efficiencies. We're looking at decreased process cost. And number three, we're looking at improved quality and consistency. So all of this dives in together from understanding what's happening from a brewery side point and diving in with one, understanding the maximum ways to maximize tank and equipment utilization and avoiding buying more equipment when you can actually squeeze as much as you can out of the actual tanks that you have by just better planning and better proper efficiency tracking. Number two, getting real-time process reports, right? At any given point, you should be able to say, this is the exact dollar value that I have sitting in all of my tanks right now. And being able to understand that for every day that a tank is not filled with beer, just how many dollars you're losing out on empty tanks. And from there, being able to dive in on streamlining communication by removing redundant paperwork. This is an issue that I deal with customers all the time, where people are just so used to having the paper logs and then from there diving into it, translating that over into a spreadsheet, then sending out that end of shift email, where really having a proper management system should be real time and remove all that redundancy that happens, where the time savings alone can prove an ROI for any data management system if it's properly set out to focus on improving efficiencies. From there, let's look at the second aspect of decreased process costs, and that really dives in with being very proactive again, and proactively monitoring things like process outputs, right? Where imagine if instead of consistently you're getting 17 barrels out of your 15-barrel brew house, what's happening where maybe one day you have 13 or 14 barrels, right? What changed? Why did that happen? And being able to proactively monitor that. From there, diving in on downtime and understanding just how many minutes or hours equipment is going down for at your brewery and putting a true dollar value on that. Understanding schedule changes, and from there, getting real time alerts to be more proactive as things start deviating from the plan. From there, improving recipes to optimize ingredients, right? What happens if you do some recipe substitutions or if you actually use different grains or hops to get that final product that you care about, but it may be at a cheaper value from a different vendor or from a different grain bill? And finally, understanding the exact cost of goods for each beer. I cannot stress this enough that at any given point, you need to be able to pull up the exact brand and batch and know the exact cost of goods that went into that. And if you can't do that yet, let's have a discussion about it. Let's see what we can do to implement these data management practices at your brewery so that way you understand just where that's trending. Because if you don't have that cost of goods number, you have no idea of understanding if your brewery is actually making profit when you're selling beer in cans, bottles, or kegs, or even as pints, right? And so that's where cost of goods is super critical for success. From there, let's actually dive in on improved quality and consistency. And realistically, when you start diving in on everything about it, comparing 300 plus data points across all batches, right? And being able to look at that to ensure that customers are consistently drinking high quality beer. And again, 300 data points may seem super overwhelming, but when you start diving in and look at all the different touch points that happen in beer on brew day, looking at pHs, gravities, number of minutes, on fermentation days and every single day for the gravity, the pH, the temperatures, as you transfer beer, as you do split batch variations, as you do all these different one-offs and R&D beers, you want to have a software system that's tracking every single data point, but also every single dollar value that's diving in with that. And finally, as customers have improved consistency, there's repeatable product that ensures brand loyalty. If I go to your brewery and I know that I'm grabbing that pint of IPA or pale ale or lager, if I know exactly how it's going to taste, I have loyalty. And I'm going to keep coming back and recommend you to all of my friends as well. So again, these are just some examples of using data management with solutions and diving in on how proper software systems, just proper practices can be executed at a brewery to have proper data management all throughout. From there, let's actually dive in and go a little bit further with key takeaways from all this, right? And so with that, we're looking at overall understanding your brewery's health by using data to focus on quality and efficiency issues. Make data-driven decisions, not just anecdotes anymore. Focus on what it is that you're showing and actually build out a proper data management SOP for your brewery. In order to do that, there are four key questions that come up. The first one is, how do you get started? And with that, it's coming up with the three key areas of data management and the issues that are there for your brewery. Number two is organizing all the data into proper steps of analytics of collecting, transforming, and predicting. From there, taking action today, right? You can definitely sign up for a demo with us for Beer 30, see how that plays out. And even if you're using your spreadsheets, taking actions by focusing on the 4Ps that I mentioned and actually being able to dive in and understand just how things are going from a metric perspective. And finally, diving in actual setting up of success metrics and revisiting the three key areas that you outlined earlier with data management as issues, but now revisiting them as solutions and understanding what that actually looks like for your brewery. And if you do all these things correctly, theoretically, you should be able to hashtag brew better beer and hashtag brew more beer, right? So being able to look at ways to brew better beer, brew more beer, and dive in with that. Overall, with that, we have about 5-10 minutes left, so I'm open to all questions. As our friend Homer Simpson is showing here, you can send me an email, pk@thefifthingredient.com. You can visit the website, thefifthingredient.com, and check out more about the software. You're more than welcome to add me on LinkedIn, and we can connect there, and definitely follow us on social media at thefifthingredient.com as well. Huge thank you to Andrew Copland and the craft beer professionals community. It's been really cool to see Andrew put these talks together and put these conferences together. This is the third one as well, and so it's really cool to be back and just helping out the community with things on data. So with that in mind, I'm more than happy to take any questions. Feel free to just add them into the chat window. I should be able to get them from StreamYard, and we'll go from there on things to wrap up. Cool. And if there aren't any questions right now, as people keep watching this into the future, because this is just always available as free material on YouTube, feel free to comment there as well, and feel free to comment data, or even just shoot me an email or message, and we can go from there. Cool. So again, thank you, everyone. Let me know if anybody has questions in the future, and looking forward to helping each brewery focusing in on data and helping them improve their brewery health. Thank you. Take care. Bye.